The submersible deep echo shook as it pushed through the final layer of crushing water, and I felt my ears pop with the pressure change. 2,000 meters of black ocean dropped away beneath me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still down there, watching me go. Control to deep echo. We have you on surface radar. Dorothy's voice crackled through the comm system, professional as always. How's our deep-sea tourist feeling? I pressed the transmit button, surprised by how rough my voice sounded. Like I've been holding my breath for 3 days. The joke fell flat, even to my own ears. Truth was, I felt off. Not sick, exactly, but different. Like I'd left something important in the depths, and couldn't remember what. The recovery boat's hull came into view through my porthole, and I started the docking sequence on autopilot. My hands went through the familiar motions while my thoughts kept returning to what had happened down there. At maximum depth, when the radio had cut out and the quiet became so total I could hear my own heartbeat, that's when I'd heard it. A voice, clear as day, singing the most beautiful melody I'd ever heard. I'd actually pressed my face against the porthole, searching the darkness for where it came from. The song had been so beautiful, so perfectly made, that I'd forgotten to check my oxygen levels for who knows how long. When I finally came back to my senses, my hands were trembling and my depth gauge showed I'd been sitting still for 20 minutes. The docking clamps clicked into place with a metal thunk, and I started shutting everything down. Through the porthole, I could see Dorothy on the recovery deck, her dark braid flying in the wind as she hooked up the crane cables. She worked with her usual speed, but something about the way she stood looked tight. "Welcome back to the land of the living," she said when I finally climbed out of the submersible. Her brown eyes scanned my face with the same intensity she used to check equipment. "You had us worried with that radio silence." "Radio silence?" I pulled off my headset, frowning. My comm system died completely around hour 6. Couldn't raise anyone. Dorothy's face changed to something I couldn't quite figure out. "Derek, we kept clear contact throughout the entire dive. You answered every check-in." The deck felt like it was moving under my feet, though the sea was calm. That can't be right. I lost all communication when I reached the thermal layer. "You told me about the bioluminescent displays at depth, described the sediment patterns on the trench floor." She crossed her arms. "We talked about extending the bottom time by 30 minutes. I stared at her, thoughts spinning wildly. I couldn't remember any of those conversations. The only voice I could recall was the one singing that strange song. "Maybe the pressure got to me more than I thought," I said, forcing a laugh. "Nitrogen narcosis can cause memory gaps, right?" Dorothy didn't look convinced, but she nodded toward the equipment bay. "Let's get your gear secured. Owen's probably pacing holes in your living room by now." The drive home passed in a blur of familiar coastal highway, but the melody kept playing in my head with startling clarity. Every note was perfect, clear as crystal, like it had been burned into my memory. I found myself humming along without realizing it, the tune flowing from my lips as naturally as breathing. Owen was waiting on our front porch when I pulled into the driveway, her auburn hair catching the late afternoon sun. She looked tired, worry lines creasing her forehead, but her smile was real when she saw me. 3 days is too long," she said, wrapping her arms around me before I'd even made it up the steps. "I don't care how important the research is." I held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, but part of my mind was still 2,000 meters down, listening to that strange voice. "I missed you too." Inside, Owen had prepared my favorite meal, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, but I found myself picking at the food without much appetite. The flavors seemed muted somehow, like I was tasting everything through a filter. "So how was it?" Owen asked, settling into the chair across from me. "Any groundbreaking discoveries in the abyss?" I started giving her the usual report, water temps, rock samples, how the gear was running, but the words felt empty. What I really wanted to talk about was that sound, the way it had reached something buried deep in my chest. But how do you explain something you can't even make sense of yourself? Actually, something strange happened down there, I said, finally. When my radio went out, I started hearing things, a voice singing. Owen's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. What kind of voice? Female, beautiful, like nothing I've ever heard before. The melody started playing in my head again, and I found myself humming a few bars. It was probably just auditory hallucination from the pressure and isolation, but it seemed so real. Derek. Owen set down her fork, her green eyes serious behind her glasses. Dorothy called while you were driving home. She said you never lost radio contact. The salmon turned to ash in my mouth. That's what she told me too, but I swear I couldn't reach anyone. The only thing I could hear was that song. Owen reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, pulling me back to the here and now. The pressure down there is incredible. It could have messed with your inner ear, caused hearing problems. You should see a doctor. I feel fine, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure they were true. Something had changed during those 3 days in the deep. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the air tasted different, in the persistent melody that wouldn't leave my head. Humor me, Owen said. Just a quick checkup. Make sure everything's normal. I nodded, though I had no intention of seeing any doctor. What would I tell them? That I'd heard a siren song in the deepest part of the ocean? That I could still hear it now, getting stronger as the sun set outside our kitchen window? That night I lay in bed listening to Owen's steady breathing beside me, but sleep wouldn't come. The tune played on an endless loop in my mind, each round more clear than the last. I could almost see the source now. Ghostly figures moving through the water with fluid grace, their voices blending in perfect harmony. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of diving without equipment, my lungs somehow pulling oxygen from the seawater as I went down toward a distant blue glow. The figures were waiting for me there, their song getting louder with each stroke, welcoming me home to a place I'd never been but somehow knew. I woke with salt on my lips and knew with complete certainty that I'd go back to the depths, no matter what it cost me. The shower water felt strange against my skin, too gentle, like it wasn't quite touching me. I rubbed my hands over my arms, and that's when I noticed them. Small, hard bumps along my knuckles that definitely hadn't been there 3 days ago. I flipped my hands over under the spray, squinting at the dark spots. They looked like tiny barnacles, rough and crusty, grouped around my joints. The water rolled off them instead of soaking in. "What the hell?" I muttered, scrubbing at one with my thumbnail. It didn't budge. The tune started up again in my head, that same crystal-clear song from the depths. It had been playing on and off since I got back, like a radio station I couldn't quite turn off. Beautiful but constant, and getting more irritating by the hour. I finished my shower quickly and wrapped a towel around my waist, still checking the bumps. They felt warm to the touch, warmer than the rest of my skin. Maybe it was an allergic reaction to something in the submersible. The air recycling system down there wasn't exactly clean. "Derek, everything okay in there?" Owen's voice came through the door. "Yeah, just finishing up." When I came out, she was sitting on the bed folding laundry, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up and smiled, then her face changed as she noticed me picking at my hands. "What are you doing?" "I think I got some kind of rash from the dive." I held out my hands for her to see. Probably from the recycled air or contaminated equipment. Owen put down the shirt she was folding and took my hands, turning them over to check the bumps. Her fingers were gentle but thorough, the way she handled everything, step by step, careful. "These aren't a rash," she said after a moment. "They're more like, growths, and they're really hard." She pressed one lightly and I winced. "When did you first notice them?" "This morning. They weren't there yesterday." Her green eyes met mine, worry showing on her face. "Derek, skin doesn't change this fast. Not normally. We should see a dermatologist. It's probably just some deep-sea bacteria. I'll clear up in a few days. Bacteria doesn't cause growths like this. She was using her patient voice, the one she employed when she thought I was being unreasonable. These look almost calcified, like they're made of calcium carbonate. The tune in my head got louder, drowning out her words for a moment. I shook my head, trying to clear it. You're overthinking this. I've had strange reactions to dive equipment before. Not like this, you haven't. Over the next 2 days, Owen was right. The bumps multiplied, spreading up my forearms in clusters. They grew harder, more pronounced, until they looked like tiny black shells embedded in my skin. The song never stopped now, a constant background buzz that made it hard to focus on anything else. I was sitting at my desk, trying to write up my dive report when Dorothy called. "Hey, how are you feeling?" she asked. "You seemed pretty out of it when you got back." "I'm fine, just tired." I scratched absently at a cluster of bumps near my wrist. "Actually, have you noticed any skin irritation since the dive?" "Maybe from the equipment." "Skin irritation?" "No, nothing like that." "Why?" "I've got some kind of reaction." "Probably nothing." "What kind of reaction?" I looked down at my arms. The growths had spread overnight, forming dark patches that looked almost like scales. "Just some bumps. I'm sure it's from the recycled air system." "Derek, we use the same equipment. If there was contamination, I'd have symptoms too." Her voice carried that edge of concern I'd learned to recognize over years of diving together. "Maybe you should get checked out." "I'm fine, Dorothy." But I wasn't fine. Sleep had become impossible with the melody playing over and over in my head. I'd lie in bed listening to Owen breathe, the song threading through my thoughts until I couldn't tell where it ended and my own mind began. The bumps itched relentlessly, a deep itch that seemed to come from inside my bones. On the 4th night, Owen found me in the bathroom at 3 a.m, clawing at my arms until they bled. Dark fluid leaked from the broken growths, staining the white porcelain sink. "Jesus, Derek." She grabbed my hands, pulling them away from the wounds. "Look what you're doing to yourself." The bathroom mirror showed someone I barely knew. The growths had crept up my forearms and were beginning to dot my chest. They created detailed patterns, like charts of some deep-sea world I'd never visited but felt strangely connected to. "They itch," I said weakly. "They itch so bad I can't think." Owen dampened a washcloth and carefully wiped the blood from my arms. "That's it. I'm calling Dr. Martinez in the morning. This isn't normal." "No doctors." The words came out sharper than I intended. "It's just an allergic reaction. It'll pass." "Allergic reactions don't look like this, and they don't spread this fast." She met my eyes in the mirror. "Something's wrong, and you're scaring me." The song built to a peak in my head, beautiful and terrifying, and I could almost make out where it came from. Ghostly shapes moving through dark water, their voices reaching for something buried deep inside me. I grabbed the edge of the sink, my knuckles turning white. "If you won't see a doctor, I'm calling one myself," Owen said. "You can't do that." "Watch me." I turned away from the mirror, away from her worried face, and walked to the bathroom door. My hand was on the knob when I heard her pick up her phone. "Owen, don't. I'm calling Dr. Martinez's emergency line." I stepped out and closed the door behind me, turning the lock with a soft click. The song filled my head completely now, drowning out Owen's voice as she knocked on the door, drowning out everything except the sound of my own breathing and the steady drip of dark fluid from my arms onto the tile floor. In the mirror, the growths seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, keeping time with the melody that had followed me up from the abyss. I touched one gently, and it was warm, almost alive under my fingertip. Whatever was happening to me had started 2,000 meters down in the crushing dark, and I was beginning to understand that it was far from over. I woke to the feeling of my skin pulling tight, like someone had shrunk my clothes in the wash. The growths had spread overnight. I could feel them without even looking, hard bumps pressing against the mattress wherever I touched it. My chest felt heavy, tight, and when I ran my hand across it in the dark, my fingers found ridges of stone-hard shells clustered around my ribs. The song was louder now, not just background noise anymore, but a steady wall of sound that made Owen's breathing beside me seem distant and muffled. I sat up carefully, trying not to wake her, and the melody grew stronger as if it was responding to my movement. In the bathroom mirror, I looked awful. Something that had crawled out of a tide pool. The bumps covered my chest in dark patches, spreading up my neck toward my jawline. They felt warm under my fingertips, almost hot, and when I pressed one, it was solid all the way through. Not something attached to my skin, but as if my skin had become something else entirely. "Jesus," I whispered, and my voice came out rough and strange. I splashed cold water on my face, but it rolled right off the bumpy growths instead of soaking in. The melody in my head got louder, beautiful and awful at the same time, and I grabbed the sink until my knuckles turned white. Downstairs, Owen was already making coffee, her reddish-brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She glanced up when I entered the kitchen, and I saw her expression shift as she noticed how I looked. "Derek." She set down her mug with shaking hands. "Your neck." I touched the bumps that had shown up along my throat overnight. They felt rough and hard against my fingertips. "I know. This isn't possible. Skin doesn't change this fast." The music made it tough to concentrate on what she was saying. Everything sounded muffled, like voices drifting through water. "What?" I said this isn't normal. She moved closer, her green eyes wide behind her glasses. "We're going to the hospital. Right now." "I'm fine." The words came out as a croak. Swallowing hurt, like the growths were pressing against my throat from the inside. "You're not fine. Look at yourself." I tried to drink the coffee she'd poured for me, but it tasted wrong, flat and chemical, like drinking pool water. The melody grew louder again, drowning out Owen's voice as she kept talking about doctors and emergency rooms. Then the coughing started. It came out of nowhere, a violent spasm that doubled me over the kitchen counter. My throat felt like it was being torn apart, and when I tried to catch my breath, thick black fluid came up instead of air. It tasted of salt and something rotten, something that had been dead for a long time. "Derek!" Owen's hand was on my back, but I could barely feel it through the song and the pain. I coughed again, harder this time, and more of the dark liquid splattered across the counter. It was thick as motor oil and smelled like low tide. "We're going to the hospital," Owen said, her voice sharp with panic. "Right now." "No." I wiped my mouth with a dish towel, leaving dark streaks on the fabric. "It'll pass." But even as I said it, I could feel something stirring inside me. Not the growths. Something else. Something alive and separate from me. The melody hit a note that made my vision blur, and I had to grip the counter to stay upright. Owen stared at the black fluid spreading across our kitchen counter. "What is that?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" Her voice cracked. "You just coughed up something that looks like crude oil and you don't know what it is?" The thing in my chest moved again, higher this time, pressing against my ribs. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air wouldn't come. "Owen, Another coughing fit cut me off, this one so violent I thought my throat might split open. More black fluid, more of that dead ocean taste, and underneath it all the song kept playing, beautiful and relentless. The day passed in a blur of pain and music. The bumps on my throat made swallowing nearly impossible, and talking felt like gargling gravel. Owen hung around me, bringing water I couldn't drink and food I couldn't taste, her worry filling the house like smoke. "Please," she said for the 100th time, "just let me drive you to urgent care." I shook my head, not trusting my voice. The truth was, I was terrified of what a doctor might find. The things moving inside me weren't medical problems. They were something else entirely, something that belonged in the deep places where sunlight never touched. That evening, Owen finally fell asleep on the couch, worn out from watching me fall apart. I sat in the kitchen, listening to the song and feeling the creatures move and twist beneath my ribs. They were getting bigger, more active, like they were preparing for something. The worst coughing fit yet hit me around midnight. I barely made it to the bathroom before my throat seized up, bringing up more black liquid than ever before. But this time, something solid came with it. Something that hit the porcelain sink with a wet thud and kept moving. I stared down at the thing squirming in the basin. It was about the size of my thumb, black and slug-like, with tiny fins that flapped desperately against the sides of the sink. Its surface was slick and oily, and when it moved, I could see rows of microscopic teeth along what might have been its mouth. The melody in my head hit a peak of beautiful agony, and I understood with horrible clarity what the bumps really were. Not just shells growing on my skin, they were nurseries, breeding chambers for whatever these things were, and they'd been using my body as their host. I could feel more of them moving inside me, working their way up through my chest toward my throat. The melody swelled, welcoming and terrible, and I knew they were almost ready to come out. My legs gave out, and I dropped on the bathroom floor, black fluid streaming from my mouth as my body shook. The tiles were cold against my cheek, and I could hear Owen calling my name from somewhere far away, but the song was too loud now, too beautiful to ignore. "Derek! Oh God, what?" Owen's voice cut through the melody as she found me on the floor, surrounded by dark puddles and empty shells that had split open like broken eggs. I tried to tell her I was sorry, tried to explain what was happening, but my throat was too hurt and the creatures were still moving inside me, still getting ready to be born. "I'm calling 911, she said, her phone already in her hand. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that no doctor could fix this, but another spasm gripped me, and all I could do was lay there while my body turned into a home for creatures that should have stayed in the black depths where they belonged. The melody continued, haunting and unstoppable, as Owen's voice broke through her desperate call for help. The 911 dispatcher's voice came through Owen's phone as I stumbled toward the garage, my vision blurry with pain and that endless tune. "Sir, I need you to stay on the line. He's not staying anywhere," Owen snapped into the phone, following me. "He's coughing up black fluid and there are things growing on his skin." I slammed the garage door behind me and turned the lock, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the light switch. The fluorescent bulbs flickered on, throwing harsh light across my workbench where I kept my diving equipment maintenance tools. "Derek!" Owen pounded on the door. "Open this right now." The utility knife felt cold in my palm. I'd used it hundreds of times to cut rope, trim equipment, slice through tangled lines underwater. Now I pressed the blade against one of the larger growths on my forearm, the one that pulsed with its own rhythm. The pain when I cut was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Not just the sharp slice of metal through flesh, but something deeper, like I was severing connections to vital organs. Black fluid poured from the wound, thick and warm, carrying with it a small, writhing creature that hit the concrete floor and kept moving. "Jesus," I gasped, but I couldn't stop. The music in my head burst into a wild mix of pain and beauty, like every living thing inside me was crying out together. I cut away another lump, then another, pieces of sick flesh dropping to the garage floor as more of those worm-like creatures crawled out of my body. "Derek, please!" Owen's voice was muffled by the door and the deafening melody. "The paramedics are coming!" I looked down at my arms, now streaming with dark blood and that oily fluid. The creatures on the floor squirmed toward the drain, their tiny fins beating frantically. More growths remained on my chest, my neck, spreading faster than I could cut them away. The garage door shook as Owen threw her full weight against it. "I'm breaking this down." Another slice, another burst of pain and music. The knife was slippery in my hands now, coated with my own blood and the black substance that seemed to pour endlessly from the wounds. I could feel more creatures moving inside me, working their way up through my chest, preparing to emerge from the cuts I'd made. The door splintered. Owen burst through, took one look at me covered in blood and surrounded by writhing things, and her face went white. "Oh God, what have you done?" "Had to get them out," I croaked, my voice barely recognizable. "They're breeding inside me." She grabbed the knife from my hand and threw it across the garage, then wrapped her arms around me even with all the blood and fluid coating my skin. "We're going to the hospital, right now." "Owen, No arguments." She was crying, her tears mixing with the blood on my shoulder as she half carried, half dragged me toward her car. "I don't care what these things are. We're getting you help." The melody reached a volume that made my vision blur as she shoved me into the passenger seat. Everything looked underwater now, warped and hazy, and I could feel more creatures moving through my body, crawling from the cuts I'd made. Owen's hands shook as she started the engine. "Stay with me, okay? Just stay awake." I tried to tell her I loved her, tried to say I was sorry for whatever was happening to us, but my throat was too torn and the song was too loud. All that came out was a wet, gurgling sound that made her press harder on the gas. The street lights smeared past in bright streaks. I could feel my mind breaking apart, bits of my thoughts floating away with each beat of the song. Owen's hand found mine, her fingers lacing through my bloody ones. "Almost there," she said, her voice breaking. "Just hold on." More creatures pushed through my damaged skin, tiny black things that dropped onto the car seat and wiggled toward the floor. The song consumed everything now, flooding my head, until there was no space for thoughts, or words, or even pain. As we pulled into the emergency room parking lot, the melody suddenly stopped. The quiet was complete and terrifying, like the moment before a tsunami hits. My ears rang with the missing sound and I could hear Owen's rough breathing, the engine ticking as it cooled, the distant wail of sirens. "Derek?" Owen's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Derek, can you hear me?" My mind shattered into pieces, each fragment showing me something different. Owen's face above me, her green eyes filled with fear, the bright hospital lights overhead, hands lifting me onto a stretcher. Then darkness. When I came to, I was floating in complete blackness, weightless and somehow breathing underwater. The ocean pressed in around me from all sides. My lungs worked fine, pulling oxygen from the water like it was the most natural thing in the world. The silence stretched on, peaceful now instead of terrifying. No pain, no creatures writhing inside me, no growths pulling at my skin. Just the gentle pressure of deep water and the feeling of floating through liquid space. Then, from somewhere in the distance, I heard it. The same melody, but soft now, welcoming rather than torturous. A gentle buzz that seemed to come from the water itself, calling me toward a faint blue glow that pulsed in the depths below. I began to swim toward the light, my body moving with perfect grace through the dark water, following the song home. I dropped through the crushing darkness, my body moving with stunning grace through water that should have killed me instantly. No equipment, no air tank, no protective suit, just me and the endless black that had swallowed every deep-sea explorer's nightmares. But I wasn't drowning. My lungs worked perfectly, pulling oxygen from the seawater like I'd been born to it. The blue glow got bigger as I swam toward it, pulsing in rhythm with the melody that had been ripping through my skull for days. What I'd thought was just a distant light turned out to be something huge, a structure the size of a city block, see-through and alive, its walls rippling with glowing patterns that matched the song note for note. It wasn't a building. It was a creature. The thing breathed around me as I got closer, its see-through flesh growing and shrinking in slow, mesmerizing waves. Through its clear walls, I could see rooms and hallways filled with that same ghostly light, and moving through them, people, or something like people. They floated through the creature's insides with smooth movements that made my clumsy swimming look like a toddler's first steps. Their bodies glowed with the same pale light as their living city, skin that changed between solid and see-through as they moved. They had the basic shape of humans: 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But everything else was different in the most beautiful way possible. Delicate fins ran along their backs and forearms, and their skin rippled with patterns of light that seemed to show emotions I couldn't put into words. One of them noticed me. She broke away from the group and swam toward me through the creature's wall, passing through the clear flesh like it was made of water. Her approach was graceful and terrifying, her features sharp and alien despite their beauty. Long hair floated around her face like seaweed, and her eyes held depths that made the ocean trench look shallow. When she reached me, she extended one hand toward my chest, where the worst of the growths had been eating me alive. Her fingers were longer than human fingers, tipped with what looked like mother of pearl, and when she touched my damaged skin, everything changed. The barnacle-like shells that had been growing on me for days simply melted away. Not painfully, not violently. They dissolved like sugar in warm water, leaving behind healthy flesh marked with faint, shining scales that pulsed with soft light. The constant pain I'd been carrying vanished, replaced by a feeling of perfect wholeness I'd never experienced in my entire human life. Then she spoke, but not with her voice. You heard us calling. Her thoughts flowed directly into my mind, clear as spoken words but richer, carrying emotions and images along with the meaning. So few from the surface can hear our song. Fewer, still, survive the change. I tried to respond, to ask the hundreds of questions flooding my mind, but she pressed her fingers to my forehead, and suddenly everything clicked. The melody that had been eating away at me wasn't random. It was a test, a way to separate those who could join them from those who would die trying. The things growing inside me hadn't been parasites. They'd been scouts, getting my body ready for change. You chose this, she continued, her mental voice warm with something that felt like affection. During your descent, when you heard our call, you chose to listen instead of running. Your mind opened to us. More of them came closer now, their movements creating ripples of light through the water. They circled me without pressing in, their strange faces showing what I somehow knew was welcome and curiosity. One reached out to touch the new scales on my arm, and I felt their approval wash over me like warm sunlight. Come, my guide said, taking my hand in hers. See what you have become part of. She led me through the creature's wall, and passing through felt like diving into liquid starlight. The interior was even more incredible than it had looked from outside. Huge chambers connected by flowing corridors, all of it alive and breathing around us. Gardens of coral sang in harmonies that made my bones vibrate with pleasure. Pools of liquid light rippled with colors that didn't exist in the surface world. Other beings moved through the space, tending to growths that looked like living art, communicating in streams of thought that I could almost, but not quite understand. Children, or what passed for children among these creatures, played games that involved shaping light with their hands, their laughter creating visible ripples in the water. This is our city, my guide explained as we swam through a corridor lined with what looked like windows, but were actually transparent organs that showed the dark ocean beyond. It has been our home for longer than your surface world has existed. We are its caretakers, and it cares for us in return. The pain that had been chewing me up for days was completely gone. The constant melody in my head had changed from torture into something beautiful and welcoming, a background harmony that connected me to every other being in this place. For the first time since I'd come up from that dive, I felt like I could breathe right. The change isn't finished, she warned, her thoughts carrying hints of worry. Your body still remembers the surface. You could go back, if you chose, but each day you stay here makes that choice harder. I looked down at my hands, now marked with scales that caught the city's glow. My fingers had grown longer, more graceful, built for slicing through water. When I flexed them, I could feel webbing stretching between each digit. "Why me?" I asked, finally managing to shape the thought clearly enough for her to understand. "Because you were already searching," she replied. "Your kind spends so much energy fighting the ocean, trying to beat it or run from it. But you went deeper than most, listened longer than most. When we sang, you heard music instead of danger." She brought me to a room at the city's center where the walls glowed with bright energy and the water itself seemed to make music. Other creatures drifted here in quiet thought, their bodies completely see-through, their minds flowing together in a shared awareness that felt like finally coming home after years of being alone. "Sleep now," my guide said, her mental voice getting quieter. "Let the city fix what the surface world broke. Tomorrow, we'll show you more." I drifted in the warm, musical water, surrounded by creatures who welcomed me without questions or doubt. The patches on my skin beat in time with theirs, and I could feel my thoughts starting to blend with the gentle flow of shared awareness that moved through the city. Somewhere far above, Owen was probably crying over my hospital bed, but that felt like someone else's life now, someone else's pain. Here, in this unreal place, I was exactly what I was meant to be. The city breathed around me, and I breathed with it, finally complete. Time moved differently in the depths. Days blended into weeks, or maybe months. The city's gentle pulse marked rhythm instead of hours, and I stopped caring about surface measurements. My body had settled into its new form, gills working smoothly alongside lungs that barely remembered air, scales changing color with my emotions like a living mood ring. Lyra, that's what I called my guide, though her real name was more like a melody than a word, taught me to navigate the city's flowing corridors. The living walls responded to touch, opening passages or creating new chambers based on need. Everything here grew rather than being built, shaped by collective thought and centuries of patient cultivation. "You learn quickly," she said one morning as I successfully directed a section of wall to form a viewing portal. Her mental voice carried warmth and something like pride. "Most surface dwellers fight the symbiosis. You welcome it." The other beings had welcomed me into their world completely. I joined their daily routines, tending the coral libraries where memories lived in crystal formations, participating in the song-shaping sessions where pure thought became visible art, floating in the meditation chambers where individual consciousness melted into peaceful unity. The children especially drew my attention. They played games impossible on the surface, sculpting light into temporary creatures that swam through the water before dissolving back into energy. When they laughed, the sound created ripples of color that danced across the city's walls. "Watch." One of them projected to me, a young being whose scales shimmered silver and blue. She cupped her hands and began humming, the melody taking physical form as a tiny whale made of condensed starlight. The creature swam around my head, its song harmonizing with hers before dispersing into sparkles. I tried to copy her technique, focusing my thoughts into sound, but only managed a shapeless blob of dim light that collapsed immediately. The children found this hilarious, their laughter creating aurora patterns in the water around us. "It takes practice," Lyra assured me later as we swam through the memory gardens. "You still think in surface patterns, forcing instead of flowing. Here, intention shapes reality, but gently." She showed me how to access the coral libraries, pressing my palm against formations that held thousands of years of stored knowledge. Images flooded my mind, the city's birth from a single organism, the slow evolution of its inhabitants, their discovery of consciousness sharing, their decision to remain hidden from the surface world. "Your kind would try to study us," an elder explained during one of these sessions. His thoughts carried the weight of centuries, mixed with sadness. "Capture us, dissect us, turn our gifts into weapons. We learned long ago that separation keeps us alive." But even surrounded by wonders, something bothered me. During the quiet periods when the city dimmed its lights for rest, my mind drifted to places I tried to forget. Owen's laugh when she caught me humming off-key, the way she bit her lip when focusing on research, her hand finding mine during movies, fingers linking automatically. These memories felt like splinters stuck in my transformed consciousness. The being's shared awareness couldn't reach them. They belonged to a part of me that stayed stubbornly, painfully human. "You're troubled," Lyra noticed one evening as we drifted in her private chamber. The walls here glowed with warm amber light, and gardens of singing anemones made a gentle harmony that usually settled my thoughts. I tried to share my feelings with her, but the emotions were too jumbled, too connected to experiences she couldn't grasp. "I remember someone," I finally managed. "The surface female. Your mate." Her mental voice held no judgment, but I felt her worry. "These connections fade with time. The city will heal that pain as it healed your body." "What if I don't want it healed?" The question surprised us both. Lyra's scales changed to deeper colors, confusion mixed with worry. "The surface world damaged you. We saw the poison in your system, the conflict tearing your mind apart. Here you have peace, purpose, belonging. Why cling to what caused suffering?" I couldn't explain it to her, couldn't make her understand that the pain was part of what made the love real. The beings had removed conflict from their existence, but they'd also removed the messy, complicated emotions that gave life texture. Their harmony was perfect and beautiful and somehow empty. "Show me the surface," I asked suddenly. Lyra's alarm rippled through the water around us. "That would be unwise. You've changed too much. The pressure difference alone." "Just to the edge. I need to see." She studied me for a long moment, her alien features impossible to read. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, but you must understand. Each journey toward the surface makes returning more difficult. Your body remembers its old form, fights the improvements we have given you." We swam upward through the city's highest chambers, past the gardens and meditation pools until we reached a section I'd never seen before. Here, the walls were thicker, reinforced against the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. Lyra led me to a viewing chamber with clear walls that looked out into the complete darkness beyond. "There," she said, pointing upward. 2,000 meters above us lies your former world." I stared into the black water, trying to picture the distance. Somewhere up there, Owen was probably sleeping in our bed, maybe dreaming about me. Maybe she'd stopped dreaming about me altogether. How long had I been gone? Time meant nothing here. But on the surface, people aged and died and got on with their lives. "She thinks you are dead," Lyra said gently, reading my thoughts. It would be kinder to let her believe that than to return as something she can't understand. But I was already swimming upward, my body moving before my mind could stop it. Lyra's worried calls followed me as I pushed through the chamber's exit and into the open ocean above the city. The pressure slammed into me right away. My gills, so perfectly suited to the city's filtered environment, fought against the rough water. My scales started to fade, their glowing patterns blinking, like burned-out lights. But I kept going up, pushed by something I couldn't explain. "Please." Lyra's voice drifted up from below, getting weaker as I climbed. "You're going to hurt yourself for something that's gone." Maybe she had a point. Maybe Owen was just a ghost, something left over from who I used to be. But as I pushed higher, battling the crushing weight and the ache spreading through my transforming body, I understood something those creatures would never get. I'd rather be broken and human than perfect and empty. The city's lights grew dimmer below me as I swam up through the crushing darkness. My gills sealed shut, forcing my lungs to remember how to process the thin oxygen dissolved in deep water. My scales pulled back, leaving behind skin that felt raw and vulnerable. Lyra's song followed me upward, not angry, but deeply sad. A goodbye that carried love and loss and the knowledge that some choices couldn't be undone. I swam toward the surface, toward Owen, toward a world that would probably kill me, but at least I'd die as myself. I opened my eyes to fluorescent lights and the sharp smell of disinfectant. Everything hurt. Not the sharp, tearing pain of the creatures growing inside me, but a deep ache that went all the way to my bones, like I'd been hit by a truck. My throat felt raw. My chest was tight. And when I tried to move my arms, they responded like they belonged to someone else. "Derek?" Owen's voice cracked like she hadn't used it in days. I turned my head. Even that simple movement sent waves of exhaustion through me, and saw her sitting in a chair beside my bed. She looked awful. Her auburn hair hung limp and unwashed. Dark circles shadowed her eyes behind smudged glasses, and her clothes were wrinkled like she'd been sleeping in them. "Hey," I managed, my voice coming out as barely a whisper. She made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh God, you're awake. You're actually awake." Tears started streaming down her face as she reached for my hand. "I thought... the doctors said..." "How long?" I asked. 3 weeks. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "You've been unconscious for 3 weeks. Your body was shutting down, and they couldn't figure out why. Some kind of parasitic infection, they said, but nothing they'd ever seen before. 3 weeks. I looked down at my arms, expecting to see the dark shells and twisting growths that had been devouring me alive. Instead, I found pale skin marked with faint silvery lines that traced patterns across my forearms and chest. The marks were barely visible, like old scars that had healed almost completely. But when I focused on them, they seemed to glimmer. The doctors removed what they could. Owen continued, following my gaze. But some of the things had dissolved on their own by the time the paramedics got you here. They've never seen anything like it. I tried to sit up, but Owen gently pushed me back down. "Don't. You're still weak. Your body went through something awful, and the doctors aren't sure about long-term effects." "Owen, I need to tell you something." The words felt strange in my mouth, like I was remembering how to speak. "Where I was, during those 3 weeks. You were here," she said firmly, "in a coma, fighting for your life." "No," I shook my head, which made the room spin slightly. "I was somewhere else. Somewhere impossible." Her face changed, worry replacing relief. "Derek, you've been through a lot. Seeing things that aren't there is normal after what your body went through. It wasn't a hallucination." I caught her hand in mine, surprised by how cold my fingers felt. "I was in a city under the ocean, a living city with creatures that looked almost human but weren't. They saved me, Owen. They took away the pain and showed me things I can't even describe." Owen's grip tightened on my hand. "Honey, listen to me. You've been unconscious. Your brain was fighting the same infection as your body. What you remember. The creatures were beautiful," I continued, the memories flooding back with perfect clarity. "They communicated through thoughts, and their city was alive, breathing around us. They had gardens made of light and children who could shape music into living things." "Derek, stop." Owen's voice carried a note of panic now. "You're scaring me." I looked at her face. The woman I'd loved for years, who'd sat beside my hospital bed for 3 weeks thinking I might die. She needed proof, something she couldn't explain away with medical terminology and rational thinking. I focused on the silvery marks on my arm, remembering how the scales had felt when they pulsed with their own light. The faint lines began to glow, soft at first, then brighter until they threw pale blue-green light across the hospital room's white walls. Owen jerked her hand back like I'd burned her. "What the hell?" The scales, because that's what they were, I realized, just sleeping, kept glowing with soft light. They drew complex patterns across my skin, making the same designs I'd seen on the creatures in the underwater city. When I focused, I could make them brighter or darker, like turning a light switch up and down. Jesus Christ, Owen whispered, staring at my glowing arms. How are you doing that? They changed me, I said simply. Not completely. I chose to come back before the transformation finished. But part of me will always belong to that place now. Owen jumped up suddenly, pacing to the window and back. This can't be happening. Bioluminescence in humans doesn't exist. There has to be a scientific explanation. There is, I said. Just not one that fits in your textbooks. She stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked at me, taking in the glowing scales and whatever else had changed in my face. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about Lyra and the living city, about the choral libraries and the children who played with light. I described the perfect harmony of shared consciousness, the way pain and loneliness simply didn't exist in that place. I told her about the choice I'd made to leave paradise and swim back toward the crushing darkness, fighting my way to the surface because I couldn't let go of her. Owen listened without interrupting, her face cycling through disbelief, wonder, and fear. When I finished, she sat back down heavily in her chair. You're telling me there's an entire civilization living in the deep ocean, she said slowly. Yes. And they can transform humans into something like them. Yes. And you chose to leave this perfect underwater paradise to come back to me. I let the scales fade back to faint silver lines. I chose you, Owen. I'll always choose you. She stayed quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with tears she hadn't shed yet. What happens now? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me is still connected to that place. I can feel them calling, especially when I'm near water. The song never completely stopped. The song that was driving you crazy before? It's different now. Gentler. Like they're waiting for me to decide. Owen's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Decide what? I took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment that would change everything between us. Whether to go back alone or bring you with me. Her face went white. Bring me with you. Lyra, my guide, she showed me how. The transformation doesn't have to be traumatic like mine was. When someone chooses it willingly with preparation, it's beautiful, peaceful. You're asking me to give up being human. I'm asking you to become something more than human. Owen got to his feet again, backing toward the door. Derek, You don't have to decide now, I said quickly. But Owen, what I experienced down there, it was perfect. No pain, no fear, no loneliness. Just peace and beauty and belonging. And no humanity, she said, her voice shaking. No individual identity, no. You'd still be you. Just better. She shook her head. I need time to think about this. I need to wrap my head around what you've told me. Of course. And I need to know, if I say no, will you go back anyway? The question hung in the air between us like a knife. I wanted to tell her no, that I'd stay human for her, that our love was enough. But I could feel the pull even now, the gentle current of the song calling me home to a place where I'd never feel incomplete again. I don't know, I said honestly. Owen nodded, tears finally spilling over. At least you're being honest. She moved toward the door, then stopped. I love you, Derek. But what you're asking, it's not just about changing my body. It's about giving up everything I am, everything I've ever known. I know. I need time. Take all the time you need. She left, and I lay back in the hospital bed, feeling the faint pulse of scales beneath my skin and the distant song calling from 2,000 meters below. Through the window, I could see the ocean stretching to the horizon, dark and full of unimaginable promises. Owen would have to choose soon, and so would I. I woke up every morning to the sound of waves, even though our house sat a quarter-mile inland. The song had followed me back from the depths, weaving itself into the rhythm of my heartbeat, the whisper of air through the vents, the distant buzz of traffic. Owen pretended not to notice when I'd stop mid-conversation, head tilted like I was listening to something she couldn't hear. "The discharge papers say you need to take it easy for at least another week," she said, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. Her voice carried that careful tone she used when she was trying not to worry. I picked at the eggs, but they tasted like cardboard. Everything did now. The flavors that used to make my mouth water, Owen's coffee, the sourdough bread from the bakery downtown, even chocolate. All of it felt muted, like eating through a filter. Only water tasted right anymore. I'd been drinking glass after glass, and it still wasn't enough. "I feel fine," I said, though that wasn't exactly true. I felt different, restless, like my skin was too tight and the air too thin. Owen sat across from me with her laptop open, surrounded by printed articles and medical journals she'd been gathering since I got home 3 days ago. "I've been reading about parasitic infections that affect the nervous system. There are cases of people having ongoing auditory hallucinations months after treatment. It's not a hallucination. Derek." She looked up from her screen, and I saw the exhaustion in her green eyes. "I know you believe what you experienced was real, but your brain went through severe trauma. The doctor said, the doctors don't know what they're talking about." I pushed back from the table, leaving the flavorless eggs behind, and moved to the kitchen window. Our backyard rolled down toward the coastal road, and past that, the Pacific spread out without end. Just seeing it made the scales beneath my skin buzz with excitement. "You're doing it again," Owen said quietly. "Doing what?" "Staring at the ocean like it's calling your name." I turned back to her, and she was watching me with that look I'd been seeing more often, part worry, part fear, part something that seemed almost like sadness, like she was already saying goodbye to someone who was still standing right there. "Maybe it is," I said. Owen slammed her laptop shut. "I'm calling Dr. Martinez, and you need to see a neurologist, someone who knows about brain injuries." "Owen!" "No." She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I've been patient. I've listened to your stories about underwater cities and magical transformations, but you're getting worse, not better. You barely eat. You don't sleep. And yesterday I found you standing in the shower for 2 hours, just letting the water run over you." She was right about the shower. The water felt amazing against my skin, like coming home after a long trip. I lost track of time, lost track of everything except the feeling of liquid flowing over the faint scales that appeared whenever I got wet. "I don't need a doctor," I said. "I need you to trust me." "I do trust you. But I don't trust whatever's happening to you." The melody filled my mind, blocking out her voice for a second. I grabbed the counter's edge until it faded, leaving that old familiar hurt I'd grown used to carrying around. "Show me," Owen said suddenly. "What?" "The scales. The glowing thing you did at the hospital. Show me again." I looked down at my arms, hidden beneath the long sleeves of my shirt. The marks were there, faint silver lines that traced patterns across my skin like a road map to somewhere I couldn't reach. When I rolled up my sleeves, Owen stepped closer, studying the barely visible designs. "They're so faint now," she said. "At the hospital, they were bright enough to light up the room. They respond to water." "Prove it." I walked to the sink and turned on the faucet, letting the cold water run over my hands and forearms. The change was immediate. The silver lines began to glow with soft blue-green light, spreading up my arms as the scales became visible beneath my skin. They didn't break the surface anymore. The transformation had been interrupted before it could complete. But they were there, waiting. Owen's breath caught. Jesus. The water felt incredible against my skin, like drinking when you're dying of thirst. I cupped my hands and splashed it on my face, and for a moment the scales appeared there too, tracing delicate patterns across my cheeks and forehead. "How is this possible?" Owen whispered. "I told you. They changed me. But the science, forget the science." I turned off the water and the scales faded back to faint silver lines. "Some things don't fit in your textbooks." Owen stayed quiet for a while, watching my arms as the last bits of glowing faded away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "What else can you do?" I'd been wondering the same thing. The changes weren't just on the surface. I could feel differences in my body that went way deeper than skin. I can hold my breath for a really long time now. How long? I don't know. I haven't tested the limits. Test them now. I took a deep breath and held it, feeling my lungs expand way past their usual limit. Seconds ticked by, then minutes. Owen watched the clock on her phone, her eyes getting wider as time went on. At the 5-minute mark, I felt something change in my throat, a sensation I knew from my time in the depths. "Derek, your neck." I reached up and touched the narrow openings that had formed along my throat. Gills. They didn't work in air, but they were there, attempting to pull oxygen from water that didn't exist. "Oh my God," Owen breathed. I let out my breath and the gills closed, leaving behind skin that looked completely normal. "There's more." "More what?" "Changes. Things I can do now that I couldn't before." I paused, knowing this next part would scare her. "I dream about the city every night, and sometimes when I'm sleeping I try to go back there." Owen's face turned white. "What do you mean, try to go back?" "You've been stopping me, waking me up when I get out of bed and head for the door. You probably thought I was just restless, but I was sleepwalking toward the ocean. You were going to walk into the water. I was going home." The word hung between us like a confession. Owen sank back into her chair, her hands trembling as she took in what I'd just said. "This is insane," she said finally. "All of it. The scales, the gills, the sleepwalking. None of it should be possible." "But it is possible. It's happening." "And you want me to believe that there's some underwater civilization that can transform humans into... what? Mermaids?" "Not mermaids. Something better. Something that doesn't hurt or feel lonely or afraid." Owen laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "You're describing paradise. Because that's what it was. And you left paradise to come back to me." "Yes." "Why?" The question threw me. I'd been asking myself the same thing every day since I'd woken up in the hospital. Why had I fought my way back to the surface? Why had I chosen pain and confusion over perfect peace? "Because I love you," I said. "But you're miserable here." I couldn't deny it. Every day on the surface felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit, breathing air that wasn't quite right, existing in a world that had become foreign to me. The song called "Constantly Now," a gentle but persistent pull toward the depths where I belonged. "I'm trying to adjust," I said. "You're dying, Derek. Maybe not physically, but something in you is dying every day you stay here." She was right, and we both knew it. I could feel myself slipping away, turning into barely a whisper of who I'd been down there. The beautiful balance I'd felt was crumbling, leaving nothing but chaos and this ache that wouldn't go away. "Come with me," I said suddenly. Owen's eyes went wide. "What?" "Come with me to the city. Let them show you what I experienced. Let them change you too." "Derek, no. You could be free, Owen. Free from worry and pain and all the things that make life so hard up here. We could be together in a place where nothing can hurt us. I don't want to be free from being human." "Why not?" She stood up, walking to the window and back. "Because being human is who I am. The worry, the pain, the uncertainty. That's part of life. You can't just cut out the bad parts and expect to still be yourself. You'd still be yourself, just better. No, I'd be something else wearing my face. The music swelled in my mind, gorgeous and desperate. I could sense Lyra reaching out to me from below, her voice blending with the others in a melody that filled my chest with aching need. "They're calling me," I said. Owen turned from the window, worry clear on her face. "Right now. They've been calling me since I got home, but it's getting stronger, more insistent." "What are they saying?" "That it's time to choose. I can't exist between two worlds forever. Either I come back to them, or I commit fully to this life and let the connection fade." "And if you let it fade?" I thought about that, imagining a life where the song went quiet and the scales vanished for good. Where I could eat Owen's cooking and actually taste it, where I could sleep through the night without dreaming of glowing gardens and kids made of pure light. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "It would be like cutting out part of my soul." Owen's eyes filled with tears. "And if you go back?" "I'd be complete again, perfect, happy. But you'd be gone." "Not gone, transformed." "Same thing." We stared at each other across the kitchen, the weight of difficult choices settling between us like a wall. Outside, the ocean called with its endless voice, promising peace and belonging, and an end to the constant ache of existing in the wrong world. "How long do I have to decide?" Owen asked. "I don't know, but not long. My body is starting to reject this place. I can barely keep food down, and yesterday I passed out just from being away from the water for too long." Owen wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I need to think." "I know. And I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you won't go back without saying goodbye. Promise me you won't just disappear one night and leave me wondering what happened." I wanted to promise her that, but the song was so powerful now, and I could feel my grip on myself loosening with each hour that passed. "I'll try." "That's not good enough. It's all I can give you." Owen nodded, taking in her honesty, even though it obviously stung. "I'm heading to the library. I need to look up everything I can find about deep sea stuff, weird changes, anything that might help me figure out what's going on with you." "Owen, I know you think science can't explain this, but I have to try. It's who I am." After she left, I stood at the kitchen window watching the waves roll endlessly toward shore. The song filled my head completely now, drowning out the sound of traffic and wind and everything that belonged to the surface world. I pressed my palm against the glass, and the scales appeared immediately, bright enough to cast blue-green light across the kitchen walls. They pulsed in rhythm with the distant music, marking time until the moment when I'd have to choose between the woman I loved and the home that called my name. The ocean spread toward the horizon, dark and full of promises I wasn't sure I could resist much longer.